Yes, we have the entity here, and those relations with the universe and universal forces, as are latent and exhibited in the present entity. As to astrological conditions and aspects, there would be few that, from the purely astrological, would have started off with such a wonderful future. Many have been the alterations from the urges innate in the entity. Many have been the hindrances that have arisen to make for discontent, from that as is chiefly desired and innately felt as the proper mode of action. Taking count of self, and application of the will, is the developer or the retarder in Earth's experiences. Astrologically, then, we find the entity coming under the influence of Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, and Uranus. These all, in their various aspects, have an influence in the experiences of the entity. These influences are not greater than the will of the entity. While the varied aspects may be said to rule the entity, yet the entity, as everyone, should rather, with its own will, rule those integral aspects in the affairs of the stars, as well as of self's own life. Rather, then, than the stars ruling the life should rule the stars, for man was created a little bit higher than all the rest of the whole universe, and is capable of harnessing, directing, enforcing the laws of the universe. And the applications that have been, and are, builded in this entity. 5. In Mercury we find the high mental attributes of the mental and physical body. In those in Jupiter, of those of the broadness of vision, with the abilities to control, or be controlled, by others. Nature has made of the entity a leader, yet the entity has allowed self to be rather dominated than being the leader, as the entity may make of self, by first conquering self's own desires, and while not lauding it, or lauding the abilities, or lauding the knowledge, or lauding position, may use all to guide, guard, and direct many in such a way and manner as to bring for self that of its birthright, in the ability to lead, to guide, to aid, those that do seek counsel, do seek advice, do seek that of the knowledge concerning the relationships of individuals with individuals, and individuals with groups. In that in Mars and of Saturn, brings for those weaknesses in the expression that self may manifest, and only by the application of self's exerting self to meet the needs, not of the moment, so much as to that as may be builded from day to day, as to be able to cope with self and with others. In Venus is seen the love, and the counsel of others, that often overshadows that of self's own expression, felt as duty, rather than as sound counsel, or as proper for self's own development. This is that again wherein self may use self's abilities to self's undoing. In that scene an influences more Uranian, brings for periods when there seems to be every condition imaginable awry, whether business relations, social relations, financial conditions, every condition seems to be awry. Again there are seasons of, most things come too easy. These are to be met with that of that builded in self through the mental abilities, and the stableness of purposes may be builded by self. In the appearances, and the effect these have upon the entity in the present experience, in the one before this we find in the land of nativity, and about those portions where the first settlers in this land, and the entity's name among those of the council that established same, in that of Doan. The entity then became the judge of the people's differences as arose during those periods, and that influence, that ability, to see that as is necessary to bring about better relationships between individuals, rather than being a representative of corporations. It does not always appeal to the entity, for individuals, as individuals, appeal the most. While the conditions as arise in the present experience of the entity make for varying conditions in these relations, yet will the entity ever find that the greatest abilities, the greatest satisfaction in the chosen profession will be in that of individual counsel and individual advice, and the entity may go far in development of self, for many there be who trust in the abilities of the entity, even as during that experience. In the one before this we find in that land known as the Trojan land, the entity then among those that counselled with Hector and with Achilles' forces, being a mediator between those foes of old, and bringing much to bear on the various forces that gradually drew the peoples together later in the experiences of that land. In the name Ishtar, again the council of the entity may be found as records among those who wrote of the period, called that only in the minds, yet real in its actuality. In the influence felt, is that halting between opinions of those that would act as the lording over others, or as the recognized leaders as varying with the abilities of self. Establish self rather as one that may be the leader in fact. In the one before this we find in that land known as the Indian in the present, in that period when the peoples from the mount went into the valley, and many of the men were destroyed and the women were taken as prisoners for the building up of the land. In this period the entity led as a warrior, gaining much during a portion of the experience, losing in the latter portion, and from that experience of many women may the entity be called now a one-woman man, for the experiences were sad in the latter portion of that period. In the name Andi, in the present, the abilities to counsel, especially in that relationship has to do with lands, land grants, and those of the relationships of peoples in grants, whether as to groups, individuals, associations, or what. Land grants are particularly interesting to the entity, and well to study same. In the one before this we find in that period known as the divisions in the Egyptian land. The entity then among those that were of the school that was builded in the latter portion of that division reign. The entity then the teacher in the school, as to that of the relationships of man to man in that as is called in the present as penal law, and the codes of law as were established are, to the entity in the present, as prefaces to the knowledges pertaining to same. In the name Shum, in this present period, that of the latter experience, and the first being combined in that of the abilities of the entity lying in the law, the judgeship, and the mediator between individuals, between groups, but the greater ability lies in that of being the individual advisor, and for the judging of the rights of individual according to the written law. In the abilities in the present, and that to which the entity may attain, first, as may be seen by the study of that as has been given, that self is first to be conquered, to be known. Then establish self, once that control of self is gained, irrespective of those that are felt as inclinations, not separating self as one that would lord it over another, but that one that would manifest abilities within self to aid others. Keeping it as an ideal, be not only idealistic, have not only ideas, but be an ideal and example of that the self would have the other be. Ready for questions. Q. Should entity resume the practice of law as partner? A. Interrupting, resume the practice of law for self, separating self, not as one that would be in the position of being divided, but rather finding the abilities of self to meet the needs and to develop self. First find self. Then, when the physical body is in accord with that as will enable the self to establish the self, do that. Q. Should entity resume the practice of law as partner with his father, or in separate office in Greensboro, or should entity practice law in an entirely different place than that in which entity has ever lived? A. As given, separate self in a different office, but not in a different surrounding. The entity, in the establishing of self, will not be overshadowed, will the entity stand fast to that of the abilities within self. Q. Would entity live a happier and more normal life as a father of children, with wife giving entire time to wifehood and motherhood, than with wife continuing in an active profession? A. When this time comes, that will be met as is necessary. That as the father, is the hope, the desire, but ever has it been deferred, fearing for the conditions as is known himself. In the conquering of self, in the establishing of self in self's own abilities, will make for a very different condition. More of the ability to control self will make for the not lauding, but honouring of self. Q. Will entity ever overcome a supersensitive nature that has formerly caused depression and unhappiness? A. He will overcome it, if he will only set himself hard, to be sure, forbidden as desire. Desire is of a threefold nature, and must be controlled only by the mental and the spiritual held as an ideal. It may be overcome. Q. Should entity continue to specialize in penal or courtroom law work, which he loves, or try to make more money in other fields of law such as corporation law? A. As has been given, the individual application appeals most, rather than the corporation. Would the entity desire to make the change in which he would become known as a giant combating corporation, rather than fighting for them? For the man, as an individual, as a developing one, is individual first and foremost. We are through for the present.